Is there overwhelming evidence for evolution? Of course, by evolution, we're referring to Darwinian evolution, molecules to man evolution, particles to people, the goo to you by way of the zoo. We're talking about the kind of uh, certain types of changes that result in all life on Earth. Lateral changes with the major groups of animal and phyla on this planet. We're talking about all life that also includes plants, all sharing a common ancestor going back to the first single cell uh, self-replicating cell, going all the way back to that. And a lot of times you hear evolutionists say, "Oh, well, don't you know there's overwhelming evidence for evolution?" I love it when evolutionists say that because it's actually false. And it gets even worse. The vast majority of the people that say that, like over 99% of them, are only saying it because they heard other evolutionists say it. So when you ask them, you think if you hear the word overwhelming, right? You hear the word overwhelming. You think that that means that they have a lot of something, right? They must have a lot of evidence if they're saying it's overwhelming. But then when you ask them for it, they can't give you one single example. The vast majority of them, like over 99% of the ones that say that, are only saying it because they heard other evolutionists say it. So they don't know what example. The ones that do decide to answer, there's two different types of responses. I like to break these up into two different responses. One I call the uninformed response, and the other I call the informed response. Even the informed response is bad, but at least it's some examples. Um, the uninformed response is to kind of generalize it. It's a more general response, like, oh, well, we got all of these disciplines, and then they start citing off all these various disciplines that they think supports evolution. Like they'll say, oh, well, we got astronomy, we got geology, and biology, and physics, and it's like, okay. First of all, if they're naming astronomy, what part of astronomy would support biological claims on evolution in the past? Exactly. What part of that would support that? Astronomy. You know, if they're naming astronomy, they're just naming up disciplines. Okay. The reality is that none of these actually support molecular man evolution. But it gets worse because they're just naming off disciplines. That's all they're doing. All they did is to name off disciplines they know. Young Earth Christians can do that too, right? Because we have young Earth Christian scientists in every one of these disciplines. So we can say the same thing. But reality is that they can't give actual examples. They just simply throw out a bunch of known fields of disciplines. That's all they do. Okay. Sometimes they try to make it sound a little technical, like, oh, well, evolution is not just supported by one particular field of study. It's really supported by a whole bunch of other fields of study. And it's like, okay, give me some examples then. uh, because in reality, that's actually not true. Evolution is not supported in any of these fields of study. And but they'll claim it. Okay. Now, what about the informed response? The informed response is a little bit different. They'll try to give you some examples. Sometimes even the informed response will be generalized. Like they'll say, well, the fossil record is our response, our proof that evolution is true. And I started giving some thought about it on the last couple of days. Can the fossil evidence really support evolution? Um, potentially, hypothetically, if we had good fossil evidence where you find whole animal remains and you actually had transitional fossils that link all of these different modifications together, it would be able to show evolution is true if that was the case. Now, it just so happens it's not. And that's not the reality of the situation. The reality is that the fossil evidence gives us very limited amount of information to start with. So that's automatically strike one. And there's actually a lot more than three strikes in this, but Automatically strike one. It gives us extremely limited information, and nothing is more truer than that in the so-called hominin fossil record. Because when it comes to humans, when it comes to apes, when it comes to primates, these fossils tend to not be forthcoming. And even generally, even beyond the so-called hominid fossil record, that it would still be that way. This is why paleontologists and paleoanthropologists, anytime they get a, a nearly almost complete preserved fossil, they're dancing in the street. Okay, they're doing the polka. Okay, because it is payday at that point. They're famous because they found a preserved fossil. It doesn't happen often. Most of the time, these fossils are found in very bad conditions. Okay, extremely bad conditions, which is another thing. The poor conditions these fossils are found in. These fossils are not found in very good conditions. And because they are found in very poor conditions, they're being compressed by rock, they're being distorted, they're shattering, like the hip area gets shattered a lot, and they have to reconstruct them. So, okay, fossils are already interpretive enough, but now the person who's reconstructing them is also interpreting them because they have to figure out how to piece it together like a jigsaw puzzle, but without the box to tell them how to do it. And they don't have the animal in front of them. They can't take a time machine and go back in the past. So how do they know what the animal originally looked like? Well, they use a scaffold, right? They use modern apes, modern humans, and see, and because they believe that they have share a common ancestor, and then they try to piece them together based on that. So you wind up with some similarities. Then, of course, these fossils are found scattered, so some gets mixed up in that as well, and that's problematic. Not a big problem, but it's a problem. It happens. And of course, you got evolutionists to get hold of this information, gets the reconstruction, and gets the cast. Most of the time, like the vast majority of the time, over 99.999% of the time, we don't actually see the real fossils. Even when you think you see the fossils, you don't actually see fossils. You see a reconstruction of the fossils, you see the cast of the fossils, but what you don't ever actually see is the real thing. In fact, sometimes it's rare to even get a photo of these things. Okay, because of now partly it's not because of some conspiracy theory. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not saying that they're just trying to pull the wool out on a lot of times it's just because of the brittle nature of the fossils. You can understand that. But a lot of times they don't have access to the actual fossil. Okay, or most people don't, unless you own the fossils themselves. A lot of times, even when you see the fossils in museums, they're not their actual fossils. They're cast versions of them or reconstructed versions of them. Um, it's just intended for show because think about it, they have to be in very, very preservable type atmosphere, type environment that preserve these fossils. Otherwise, they crumble into dust. So, so a lot of times you don't actually see the actual fossils. That's unfortunate. Even with dinosaur fossils, sometimes these things are found scattered. You have to reconstruct them. Sometimes some of the bones are found later. Sometimes the heads are found later. They're not always found just in its preserved entirely. But nothing's more true than that than when it comes to the so-called hominid fossils. These tend to be found scattered. They're found with missing parts, missing bones, um, missing areas, crushed hip areas, broken skulls. I mean, all sorts of things. Sometimes only very little of it. Sometimes even only the tooth is is preserved. So these are not found in the best of conditions. And then you got people who, like I said, reconstruct them. They have to interpret how they are designed. And in addition to interpreting that, the evolutionists come along and then they interpret their interpretation of these fossils. So, oh, well, that they must have been bipedal. It's like, okay, it depends on how they reconstructed the foramen magnum. And then, of course, with bipedalness of humans, it's not just one item that makes us bipedal. It's the whole thing. It's everything. It's every part, the rib cage, the backbone, the the pelvis area, the hip bone. I mean, all these things are combined to make us walk upright. It isn't just one thing. It's the whole thing. And there's no doubt whenever I look at things like Australopithecines that there clearly was not bipedal. I don't care what Erica says. I don't care how confident she is. I don't care if she has a degree in primatology. I don't care if she's almost ready to get to her degree in paleoanthropology. I'm telling you, Erica is dead wrong. When you look at these Australopithecines, there's no doubt that they are arboreal creatures. I would say most of them, if not all of them, are knuckle walkers. They might have some limited partial ability to walk upright, just like what we see in modern apes. And I don't doubt that, but they would not walk like we do, not with unlimited upright posture the way we walk. They would have walked very differently. And there's no doubt in my mind that that would be true. I don't care how confident Eric is. They were not bipedal. Okay. I think that they would probably have the similar abilities to modern apes. Maybe they could walk a little bit more, a little bit longer, upright than modern apes can. Maybe, possibly. I'm open to that. But basically they'd be very close to modern apes. Walking along branches, being able to sit there and mostly, knuckle walk. I've seen some of these arms. They're long, just like what you expect, like from chimps and things like that, where their long arms, hang from branches. Just the way they're designed, you could tell. There's no doubt about that. Even if you could find, even if you could prove conclusively that an Australopithecus bipedal, that would just mean that it's a bipedal animal. Uh, Bipedalness is not exclusively a human trait. Birds are bipedal. Some dinosaurs, like the theropod dinosaurs, were bipedal. You know, so bipedalness is not an exclusively human trait. There's always a possibility that God could create a bipedal animal, even if you could do that. Now, can they do that? No. But even if you could do that, you know, it wouldn't be something that would prove that it was evolutionary to human. And there's also another problem, the lack of transitional fossils. The lack of transitional fossils they exist in the fossil record. Now, uh, at this point, we probably have to define what it means for transitional. Okay. Um, the word transitional originally and the way it's typically understood, even by YACs, is an intermediate state. Basically, it's really not a single fossil per se. I know we talk about it like a single fossil, but it's really more of a link of fossils. Because of what evolution claims of modifications over time leading to all life on Earth, what we would expect is constant changes leading to all these life forms on Earth, every one of them. All right. Now we would expect to see that in the fossil record. We do not. Okay. Charles Darwin thought it was just because the fossils were missing in his day. Well, that's fine. But after 150 years of searching, we're not finding it. Technically, if something is a um, if something is uh, uh, a transitional fossil, then the expectation would be that it would not be able to be taxonomically classifiable. You couldn't put because they would not be fully formed features. For example, evolutionists believe that invertebrate animals eventually evolved into vertebrate animals. Well, if that's the case, then what we should see is animals that are 40% invertebrate, 60% vertebrate. And or 50% invertebrate, 50% vertebrate. And how would you classify that? You wouldn't classify it taxonomically. You wouldn't be able to classify it as a vertebrate because it does have somewhat of a backbone. It has somewhat of a backbone and somewhat not of a backbone. So it's like, okay, what do you classify that as? And it would not be capable of a taxonomical classification. Finding animals with similarities to other animals or fully formed features, even if those fully formed features are similarities to other animals, is not transitional. Okay, you could taxonomically classify it. You can identify it as a fully formed gill, whatever the case may be. It's not a transitional. Okay, what evolutionists have tried to do is they try to redefine the word transitional to mean similarities to other parts of animals. That's called an anamorphic characteristics. And by the way, we observe that in animals today. That's not a transitional. Okay, that's similarities, yes, but similarities also support a common designer. I'll get into that in a little bit. But it would not be uh, uh, it would not prove transitional. Okay, and of course, even if you had a single fossil, and like say, let's say you find a fossil and you say, oh look, it looks like the start of gills forming. Well, that would not really prove that that's really gills. I mean, you might have interpreted it that way. But what you would need is you would need fossils, fossil, 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 just linking the formation of those gills, right? You know, and you can't just simply point to a single fossil. You need that chain links, that chain of links that you would need connecting them all. Now I realize that the fossil evidence will always be incomplete, and so we would expect at least lots of gaps in this chain. That's fine, but we found enough fossils that we should have seen at least a series of links in various locations in various times, but we don't do that. Instead, we see fully formed creatures, and that can be taxonomically classified. Even extinct creatures can still be taxonomically classified. You still wind up with Australopithecines, for example, and that sort of thing. And you say, well, they're a type of primate. Okay, yeah, that's fine. Um, but they're not transitional. Okay, they have fully formed features on them. Okay, um, some say, well, Prometheus has a little foot, has an inline big toe. That's false. A lot of times, a lot of the stuff that people are saying are actually false. They don't. But Prometheus has like I guess what you would call what I would call a semi posable toe. And semi posable is still posable. It's just not as posable, as spread out as say the modern day ape. Like a modern day ape might look like this. It might look something like that. But it's not an inline big toe. Okay, it's still posable. It's just not as posable as that of a modern ape. And but it clearly, I mean, and besides, you would need a whole bunch of other stuff. Look at the weight of Prometheus. Look how the long arms um, on Prometheus, the hip structure on Prometheus. All these things affect whether or not it's able to walk upright. Maybe so it wouldn't just be the foot. Maybe it could help walk upright a little bit better than some other Australopithecines possibly, but that's about it. And maybe it wasn't as arboreal or as good in climbing trees as others, possibly. You know, or even of modern apes, possibly. But you can look at the head and the face, and yeah, no doubt. But in any given case, even if you could prove it was bipedal, like I said, it wouldn't demonstrate it's transitional anyhow. But semi-opposable is not transitional between that and an inline big photo. And it's a fully formed feature anyhow. You would need it to be intermediate. That's the trick. It's got to be intermediate, and that's what you lack in the fossil evidence. So fossils will not be able to give you that evidence because they're highly interpreted. They're having to be reconstructed. They're very poorly conditioned fossils, and there's no transitional fossils in the fossil record, despite Charles Darwin making a prediction that future fossils will vindicate his claims, which did not happen. So yeah, fossils don't defend evolution. If anything, they actually hurt evolutionists. All right, so genetics doesn't either. Um, Sometimes you get more in what I call informed answers, whereas someone can actually give you examples, and sometimes they'll throw up things like ERVs. But ERVs, endogenous retroviruses, um, at least the kind that they point to, like that apes and humans have both have a particular ERV in their gene pool there in their DNA, and it's just a created function uh, of, of DNA, and but which also is something else in evolution uh, or in sometimes evolutionists will have something that they'll claim as evidence in favor of evolution, but it actually can will support either position. This is going to come up with a lot, but they think that something supports evolution, but it could also support that, like common design, like looking at similarities. Similarities can also be supported by common design. So it winds up being confirmation bias. And actually, a lot of times when you look at it, it's better supported by common design arguments and YEC positions than what you see in evolution. And so, but ERVs have been found, or the ERVs that they point to, that are shared between humans and apes and that sort of thing, have been found to have high functionality. They're needed in immunizations and that sort of thing, and embryological development and all sorts of stuff. I've had an entire interview with Donnie on ERVs on this channel. Um, I think we might have talked about it more than once. Or maybe it was the junk DNA argument that we talked about once. But these are being found in repetitive elements. These are not supposed to be biologically functional, according to the way the evolutionary model sets it up. If this is junk DNA, if ERVs are supposed to be as a result of viruses that entered into the fertilization process here, then what we should see is that biologically non-functional. But it's biologically functional. They're being found with lots of functionality. And so these are better explained by created units of DNA. But why we not consider that evidence for evolution? Because it can also be because it's not exclusive to evolution. It's because it can be. There are other explanations that could actually count for it. They can explain by other viewpoints, and as a result, you can't use that as evidence of evolution because it's not exclusive to evolution. For example, you can't use them to support um, um, you can't use them to support evolution because it has to be exclusive to evolution, Darwinian evolution. Um, Something that cannot be accounted for, like in case of similarities, for example, can be counted by a common designer. In the case of ERVs, are functional. Now, if they were non-functional, like if they have no reason at all to justify why they were there, in the same spot as human and ape and that sort of thing, that would be a different story. But they do. And so that's a problem, right? So you can't use fossils as evidence because the evidence is bad to begin with, but then lack of transitional fossils, it doesn't work. So what do evolutionists have? The simple answer to that question, there really is no evidence from molecules to man evolution. None. The vast majority of the people who claim that there is overwhelming evidence for evolution cannot name a single example of evidence for evolution. When examples are given, it's usually variations within a kind, things that are not exclusively evolution. Like, for example, another example of this is where they point to hierarchy in the geology, of a certain line, and they don't realize that flood models actually account for the direct positions of all these fossils in the so-called geologic column in the strata layers, um, as interpreted through a global flood. And but it gets even better for the creation side because we can account for it better than the evolutionists because we can account for why there was extinction-wide events like massive extinctions in the geologic column, or the so-called geologic column. We can account for why there's an explosion of complex, that's multicellular life. Whenever they say complex life form, they mean multicellular instead of single cell, although a single cell is even complex. But multicellular organisms found fully formed with no evolutionary counterpart in the Cambrian explosion. Oh, it gets even better because they also find soft body organisms, even in the Cambrian explosion, like jellyfish, for example, which would resist fossilization. And fossilization can really only occur in specialized conditions, anyhow. But how do you account for hundreds of millions of fossils all over the world? And so I think the flood is the best way to account for it. So you can't really account for it with evolution. So, but evolution tries to account for it, um, and they can count for maybe the order, but the order can also be accounted for by the global flood. So it's not exclusively to evolution, but we can account for the fossils in the so-called geologic column or the strata layers better than what they can because we can account for why there's extinction-wide events, why we have like in a single layer, why there's mass extinctions, you know, and we can account for the explosion of life in the Cambrian explosion, soft body organisms. So yeah, why there are mollusk shells found all over the world in the closed position, and we can account for all that. So I think evolutionists have a hard time accounting for it. Um, So yeah, and of course, in the genetic data, we can go to Y chromosome. We can go and look at the evidence of genetic similarity. Even genetic similarity is starting to really look terrible at this point. You got the ENCODE project. You got the fully sequenced ape genomes. Now they found like 12.5 to 27.3% difference between six great apes, including chimps, and human, and the fully sequenced genomes, by the way. Um, and they were able to find out that there's a great deal of differences there. And so I'm not going to cover that right now because I do have a mini series that's going to be covering it. So, but I just thought I'd mention that. So the answer to the question, is there overwhelming evidence for evolution? I'd say no. In the question, is there any evidence for evolution? If you're talking about, which is what we've been talking about, molecules to man evolution, the answer is absolutely no. Um, the type of changes that they're claiming would need to add new information to the genome. We have no new information, no naturalistic processes that can give rise to new information. I just got through debating one of the critics on that one. But new information cannot arise through naturalistic processes. We've never observed that. All right. But anyway, thank you for watching. I appreciate it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to like the video. Give it a thumbs up. And didn't intend this to be a very long video. I've got another interview scheduled for this coming week with Dr. Brian Thomas. Uh, Hope you guys liked that video. It's going to be the last episode of the Are We Apes series, so I can't wait. Um, and don't forget to hit that notification bell. Be able to um, be informed of any of all my future videos. I got more in store. I got another interview toward the end of this month with Dr. Carl Werner. Can't wait for that one. That's going to be on the supposed transitional fossils that sometimes evolutionists like to point to because they think they have transitional fossils when they don't. All right. But anyway, I will talk to y'all later, and thank you. And um, by the way, I'm in the process of moving, so yeah, it's a little chaotic around here. But I'll see you on the next one. God bless.